Park Flyer Podcast, Episode 2, Glue.
Welcome to the Park Flyer Podcast, where we discuss the ups and downs of the new RC Flyer. Join your hosts, Michael and Jay, as they take flight at the park. Now on with the show.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Park Flyer Podcast, Episode 2. Today we're discussing glue. I'm Michael.
Hey, and I'm Jay, and I'm going to tell you about some of the pluses and minuses of the types of glues and materials that you're going to use for all your building in the sport. So, Mike, just starting off with, what's your favorite glue that you use 90% of the time?
Gorilla Glue, the white Gorilla Glue, man, that stuff is awesome. I love that stuff. I think I said in the last podcast we buy it by the case.
No, absolutely, and I think one of the reasons why is because you can use it with almost any type of material, whether it be wood, plastic, metal, EPP, our favorite, bounce back foam, EPS, EPO. It just really doesn't matter. I can't think of anything that it doesn't work with. Can you?
It won't, don't use it on your plumbing pipes because I don't think it'll hold the copper together. But
okay, yeah. So metal, I'll second that. Metal to metal, it's very weak. I mean, you can use it and it will kind of work, but it's not as good as if you like using epoxy or something like that.
Well, so that you understand how strong this thing is, I built some planters for my wife. They're above ground planters, and they use big cinder blocks, the big 24 by 18 cinder blocks. I literally, instead of putting what do they call that mason stuff, the grout or
yeah, it's masonry. It's a masonry glue that comes in the big long tubes that you have to click out. Clack 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 clack.
Oh yeah, that's like liquid nails.
Yeah,
I didn't use liquid nails, but
yeah.
What's the mortar? Mortar is what I was looking for. The mortar. I didn't use mortar between it. I actually just took some Gorilla Glue, and I basically sprayed off all of the blocks, and then I just put a line of Gorilla Glue through it and set them on top of each other. And you need a crane to move those things, so it's very strong.
Admit, I was really amazed when you told me about that story. I almost didn't believe you.
Yeah. Well, you've seen it now. I mean, it's amazing. You walk over there and try to get it come apart.
You need a sledgehammer.
I can do that too. I have that ability. Sledgehammer the thing apart. My other favorite glue is CA, obviously. Of course, you want to buy foam safe CA if you're dealing with foam. You don't want to buy the regular stuff. I've burned through one or two projects with the wrong CA glue.
So that's partially true, Mike. I mean, you can use regular CA for the newer planes now, meaning the EPO type planes.
You can use EPO. It'll work on EPO.
Comma. I will say to you that you are correct with your first statement that by buying foam safe CA, you don't have to worry about gluing something together, then turning around, looking at your model, and watching it melt.
Yes.
Turn it to a pile of glue. I mean, not glue. I meant goo.
Some gooey, foamy product.
Right. And so here's the problem. So you buy a model. Maybe it's a UMX model from E-Flight, and even something that says EPO on it. And guess what? Maybe 90% of the plane has that material that we're talking about, this EPO material. And then the other 10% for the trimming edges or for a lighter part may be made out of Depron or some other EPS type material. And you will melt that plane. It'll be just like that Wicked Witch from the West.
Yes.
Bad. So, yeah.
It heats up too. I mean, that's really what causes it. That reaction of the foam and the glue and the kicker that we use, and it's a chemical reaction that to melt the foams together, but it'll create a lot of heat, and the heat does not work very well with any kind of foam.
Absolutely. Now, for my particular favorite, I have to second you on the Gorilla Glue. I would say I use it 90% of the time. But my newest glue that I've fallen in love with is stuff called Quick Grip. What is Quick Grip, you may ask? Well, it's made by a company named Beacons, and it is used for uh, assembling planes that are made from EPP.
Now
And
they sell a foam tack as well, correct?
yes, they do. They have a whole family of glues. And ask your wife about it. She will know if you say, "Hey, do you have any products for Beacons?" I bet you she'll probably say yes. If she does any kind of craft stuff, it is a
Yeah,
glue that
she uses a fabric tack,
right.
which basically puts two pieces of fabric together. But I've tried that on my foam, and it's not a good sight. It does melt. The fabric tack does not work as well as the
Right.
foam tack
Fabric
does.
Pack does not. But what I was getting at was that Beacons has a whole family of glues, from
Right.
craft stuff to hobby stuff, and it's just wonderful. And like I said, this stuff it's an alternative to using welder's glue for assembling EPP planes. And the problem with welders is that welders is a contact cement. Um, After a while, it kind of turns a little yellow, and you sometimes have to be careful that when you bond the pieces together, and if you didn't put, after you let them dry and then bond them together, well, they're stuck together forever. And if you don't get them together right, it's not like you can pull them apart and then put them back together again. That's kind of the bad thing about welders.
You mean
Um,
after the glue dries?
right. Well, basically, the way, like I said, welders is a contact cement. So basically, the way it works is you have part A, part B. You put some welders on part A, you put some on part B. You let them get tacky or almost dry for anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes or so, and then you stick them together, and then they're stuck.
Now, do you let them dry out, or do you like when I do it? I touch the two together and until the glue gets kind of stringy.
Right. It depends on the application. Right. So,
I see.
and for our listeners out there, what does he mean by that? Um, if you have a large surface that you're going to stick together, well, the way contact cements are usually used, you spread it out in one, you spread it out in the other, you let them tack up, you line them up, and then you stick them together, and they're permanently stuck. If you have like a smaller joint or a smaller thing, you can get it all wet. Put it in, like, let's say you have a carbon
Like a
rod,
hinge,
a hinge or a carbon
carbon
rod,
hinge. Yeah.
and you're trying to stick it in, you're trying to stick it in the hole. You get some of the welders on it, stick it in there a couple times. You pull it in and out or pull it apart, and you'll see these little strings where it's getting tacky and the molecules are kind of getting all lined up in their strings. And once you see that, then you can stick together, and then you can put it aside and let it dry out. And that's
Like
that's
cure.
that's fine too, and that it can cure that way. Well, this quick grip stuff that I have, the nice part about that, it takes approximately 10 minutes for the stuff to set up and kind of harden up. So you have time to move your pieces around. It's a little bit more flexible than the welder's glue. It dries perfectly clear and it doesn't yellow with age. So I kind of like it in that aspect.
Is it brittle at all?
No, not at all. Both
So,
these
so it still stretches. I mean, after you
it
apply it.
it does, and both these glues are, once again, EPP is like a Nerf ball. So you can compress this stuff, it bounces and all that kind of stuff. Now, with EPP, you can use CA, you can use our favorite Gorilla Glue with it, and they'll all work. You can even use epoxy with it, and they'll all work. But since this has a stretchy, bouncy nature, CA is a very brittle glue. It likes being very rigid. So putting it on something that likes to stretch and bounce and move, it doesn't work too good. The Gorilla Glue works very well and adheres to it very well, but and it has just a little bit of stretch to it. But you usually use it in the effect of, you want it to expand. Let's say you have let's say you tear the EPP and you try to put it back together, but it doesn't fit together perfectly. There's some bits and pieces missing. Well, by putting the EPP glue in there, it expands and foams out. So you can kind of press it together. The glue will fill in all those places where the pieces are missing, and then you can
Right.
just take a razor knife and then smooth it all out, cut the pieces off till it goes back to that shape, and you're good to go. The rest of it will still move and will all move and compress, where the EPP will still be rigid. I mean, where the Gorilla Glue will still be rigid. So it works.
I use it. I use it a lot for the spars, like the carbon fiber spar.
Oh yeah.
I'll put it down in the hole and then I'll push the carbon fiber down and then I'll take like blue painter's tape and paint over the top, or just put a big line across the top, and then that way when it's foaming, it's a little bit flatter on top.
Now you have a different technique than I didn't have to do this where I live, but after seeing your technique where you live,
Right.
I didn't understand just how well that works. So why don't you tell the folks a little bit about that, Mike?
Well, sure. I mean, I live in Arizona and it's very dry here, and the Gorilla Glue requires moisture in order to react. And so Jay unfortunately was down here for our electric festival, and he was helping a guy trying to put his airplane back together, and he was using this Gorilla Glue and had it everywhere. It was hilarious. But finally, after not really paying attention to what was going on, I finally kind of got into the whole, what are you doing over here with all this glue stuck everywhere? And so the technique that I use is I take a little bowl, just a, like one of those, what do they call those bowls that you have for
Or like a little
picnics? They're just
Dixie cup or something.
yeah, like a Dixie cup or whatever. And I put Gorilla Glue in there, and then I'll take a toothpick or a popsicle stick, and I'll get the popsicle stick wet. I'll put a couple of drops of water in there. I'll stir it up and give it a couple of seconds, and it'll start to foam. And the more water you put in there, the more foam you're going to get. And if you put too much in there, it's not going to work. It'll harden way too fast. But if you just put a couple of drops in there, the moisture, it starts kind of foaming. And then I just use the popsicle stick like a paintbrush, and I, paint the surfaces, and then it'll continue to foam. But the good news is that now that it's foaming, when you stick the two parts together, it works. It's very similar to the quick grip that you were talking about. It becomes more like a contact cement, and now it blends together. And then you can kind of scrape off the excess before it really hardens.
So to give you folks an idea of how long this takes, so this guy's plane that I was putting back together for him, I had put some major parts together, and it was like an hour later, and the glue wasn't foaming up, it wasn't tacky, it wasn't doing anything, and it was just running everywhere with the heat and everything, just all over, sticking, making everything else all sticky.
Yeah, that was funny because your hands were sticky. Everything you touched stuck to your hands.
Exactly. So it was like eating a honey bun and trying to put your plane together. So Mike comes over, spurt with some water. He was like anointing somebody. He's spurt on your plane. And this stuff was reacting, hardening up, and the plane was ready to go in less than half an hour. And I'm like, or 20 minutes, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. Now, why was there a difference as opposed to when I use a Gorilla Glue here in Alaska? Well, here in Alaska, we have a lot of moisture in the air, and the glue can react with the moisture in the air, and so it does what it's supposed to do within that half an hour's time or hour's time. And that's what I'm used to here. But going to a totally different climate, threw me for a loop. I had no idea by living in.
I think anywhere in the U.S. that has moisture, whether you're southeast or northeast, it's going to work fine. Probably Arizona, Nevada, maybe Colorado. It's kind of dry in Colorado in some areas. So.
Well, this brings up another good point, and that is with another part of this hobby is don't be afraid to experiment. Some of these tips and hints and things that we're telling you on how to do something, it's not in concrete, just like this glue, like we're telling you.
What?
Well, it's not. Yeah.
What are you talking about, dude? We're supposed to be experts at this, man. Don't
I
tell
know.
them
I know. I know. Well, we are experts, but what I'm telling them is, you may live in a hot, dry, arid place, or you may live in a damp, cold place like where I live, and the glues or the things that we're telling you will have different effects depending on where you are.
What you're telling them is I have a big box of experimental foam, pieces that I've glued together with various glues.
Yeah, and I told you to do that.
I know, right?
So, and it's kind of funny. It's just like we talked about using epoxy. So Mike and I were discussing on using epoxy and using fiberglass and epoxying things. And for me, using epoxy, not to say it's a pain, but it can take a while for that stuff to set up. And the reason being is that it's typically 55 degrees here all the time. Depending on the year. I mean, it's
A
typically
little chilly.
55 degrees here on the
Is that
average.
Fahrenheit or
Fahrenheit.
that's Fahrenheit, right? Okay.
As
Well,
opposed
it's
to
55 degrees Celsius here, so there you go. We're about 55 degrees.
where you're, what's the mean average down there? Like 80, 85 degrees.
80.
Okay.
Sure.
So epoxy loves heat. It loves warm weather. And so you're going to have two different effects on how long it takes to do something. So when I told Mike, oh yeah, lay out your cloth and put the epoxy on and blah, 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 get a ham sandwich, take your time. And next thing he's like, I did what you said, and I got this hard, rocky mass that's just sitting in the kitchen. What the heck? And I go, oh, it must have cooked off much quicker where you live because it's so warm. Wow.
Well, it cooked me off too because epoxy and I don't get along very well at all.
Unfortunately. So another little safety tip or a little health hazard. I didn't know, once again, basically because of you, that people have different reactions to glues.
Absolutely.
I had no idea that there was not an allergy, but I mean, you have, what do you want to?
It's a reaction.
It's a reaction.
I do have a reaction.
Yeah, you have a reaction to epoxy. And I had
to the fumes, actually, the fumes, not the actual glue itself, but the fumes.
Yeah, I had no idea that those things could happen. So once again, if you want to wear gloves, go ahead and wear gloves. I've heard of people having reactions to the CA glue. Once again, my buddy here with the epoxy. I haven't heard of anybody reacting to the Gorilla type glues, but it could happen.
Yeah, the only reaction I get to that is I usually wind up gluing myself to something.
Yeah,
of course that's with every glue, I think. And I've over time I've gotten better at it, but I think I've glued myself to pretty much every surface.
I will tell you one glue that you haven't glued yourself together with.
What's that? That's not true.
You haven't glued yourself.
I have. Now I've glued my two fingers accidentally.
You've burned yourself. You've gotten second to 3 degree burns with it, but you have not. You have not glued yourself to the table with that stuff.
That's true. Okay, I got your point there. You're right.
That's a whole other.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings up another point though, because hot glue is very common in a lot of projects, and I know that anybody that builds or does any building with the foam board uses hot glue. In your neck of the woods, that works great. Most of the United States work great. Here in Phoenix, not so great.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Because hot glue is exactly that. It's soft in warm weather, and you go out during the summertime here at 113 degrees, and you get about 30 seconds of flight, and your glue starts falling apart because it's all melting and getting soft, and your plane's not reacting very well. My bat wing didn't do too well because of the hot glue.
And that brings up another good point. It's so funny for us talking back and forth to each other because we live in such diverse places that I don't realize that you can't leave your planes in your car where you live.
Oh yeah,
I would give it a second thought. And it's the same thing, like you said, with the hot glue. You hot glue something all together, you go out and fly, and next thing you know, your plane's disintegrating in the air. Or you leave it on the side.
Makes for an exciting flight, though.
Yeah. So it's the same thing with like if your plane's take like the Batwing you were just talking about being in dark colors.
Right.
You got to really watch that down there.
Yeah. Well, and the hot glue is really heavy as well. So I mean, if you're making something that doesn't require a lot of you don't want it to be a lot of weight, then you shouldn't use hot glue because the more hot glue, use 3 or 4 or 5 of those sticks, the hot glue sticks, and it's very easy to do. You're pushing on that thing or pulling the trigger, and all that glue comes out of there. But it weighs a lot. I mean, it really does. When you're trying to build, save ounces on a foam airplane or blue core, or all that glue in there could weigh it a lot more than you really want it to, and it's going to affect the performance of the aircraft.
It can. I have a couple of good friends up here who they believe they don't believe in less is more. It's more is more. So they would go, yeah, they would go, I'm fixing my plane, I'm gonna use some hot glue. I go, yeah, that's great for using a quick fix on something. And they'd go, I come back and they'd say, oh, I fixed the plane, and I go, okay, yeah, but I used a whole bag of
a whole bag.
I go, a whole bag? Yeah, I used a bag and a half. I go, bag and like a stick and a half, right? And they go, no, a bag and a half. Meanwhile, like that's 20 sticks or something, right? And they're like, yeah, there was.
I think they're 52 a bag. I think really, it's like 2 pounds of hot glue
Oh
on
my gosh,
your 50-ounce airplane.
plane was fixed all right, I tell you.
Oh yeah, I mean that thing was
It
indestructible.
was indestructible. It's pretty funny, but I will say, at least for us, I don't use too much hot glue. Just
I hardly use it at all.
I think it's just because of the era of when we were building planes and such, that it was too heavy for the systems that we had during that time. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like we were flying with little IPS motors by a company called GWS, so they were all DC brushed motors, and they didn't have a lot of thrust. They didn't have a lot of power. They had to be geared systems. Or
They didn't have a whole lot of anything
no.
actually.
And so using hot glue, you couldn't use too much hot glue on anything. So it all had to be CA glued together, or Gorilla Glue
epoxy. Well, I definitely think they've come out with a lot more glues today than what we had back then. But because epoxy you can use on pretty much anything.
Yes.
And I do work with epoxy, but I have to wear like a mask and gloves and goggles because the fumes just it cause a reaction that's it's crazy. My wife can instantly tell when I've been in the epoxy room because she'll come out and, hey, you must have been working with epoxy. Your eyeballs are, big, big red. And they're all swollen. I'm looking at her like, what are you talking about? My face is all swollen up. So the reaction's more from the fume based than actually touching the glue. I don't get any reaction when I touch epoxy. But thank goodness for alcohol and rubbing alcohol because it'll take some of that stuff off. So.
Right. Now, you a couple of things, like I said, for most construction methods that you use with epoxy nowadays. Like I said, you can get away with most of them with Gorilla Glue.
True, that's
and
true.
So now the uses of epoxy that you've been getting into recently have been more for finishing the plane, but you found some alternatives to that.
Yeah, you know what I did? I having a kind of adverse effect with doing epoxy. I actually moved to a Minwax. It's a polyurethane coating. You can buy it at any home store, Ace or Home Depot, Lowe's or whatever. But it's in a little blue can, and I got about a quart of that stuff, and then I buy a real fine. I think it's 0.18 mesh fiberglass cloth. And believe it or not, you can lay the cloth, cut it. If you're gonna like reinforce foam or wood or whatever, you can reinforce it by laying this cloth out and then just using this water-based Minwax. And I've really started liking it because there's several guys out there that'll show you how to do it, but in a couple of YouTube videos, thank goodness. But you can get talcum powder, add it to the Minwax. You can paint that on with just a regular chip brush or one of those foam brushes. Let it dry, and it actually gives you a hardened surface that you can sand and paint with pretty much anything, and which gives you a lot more choices. You can use your Rattle Can spray paint, or you can go get something matched and water based and put it on there. But
and that's the big thing, to make sure you get the Minwax that's water based, not the oil based.
Yes. The oil base could do some serious damage to your foam if you're actually working with foam. And it doesn't dry very well.
And the best part is that the for the water based, the cleanup is a snap.
It is a snap because I just throw it right in my little wash basin sink there and wash it all off. So, and it dries real well and it cleans up. If I spill epoxy on the table, I actually have a space that I work with epoxy. It's a glass table. For some reason, glass is better than any other type of surface because if I drop the epoxy on there, I can usually take a razor blade and scrape the epoxy off the glass. It doesn't really stick very well to the glass. However, I will tell you that I have dropped epoxy on my wife's countertop.
Yeah. So tell me, so how does it work on granite countertops? Here's like nobody's business.
Not very well. Yes, it adheres to the granite, and hopefully your wife doesn't come in and set a glass on top of the epoxy drop, because now you have a permanently attached glass to the granite, which let me tell you goes over like
And we already know that Gorilla Glue sticks really well to rocks and cinder blocks and such. So
Correct.
it's
Yes,
equally
you
as
can use
bad.
that. Yeah, that's equally as bad. So, yeah, I would always use the brown paper or newspaper or some cardboard or something when you're gluing it. Trust me, coming from someone who's, like I said, glued myself to almost every surface, and you know, and almost had to sleep in the doghouse once or twice because my wife came in there just about irate, that I glued her countertop, glued a glass to her countertop or whatever the
She's not
case
too
was.
happy when we get together and we're having a build session for like 3 days.
No,
And then
no.
taking over your room, the kitchen, and we moved outside to the glass table. We just have this long chain of destruction.
I love her look when she comes in and sees that we're building. She just shakes her head and she's like, oh, and just turns around and walks off. I'm like, good thing I have a television in the bedroom because she'll just go in there for days. But yeah, that's the building phase it's actually really fun. I enjoy it, but it is definitely challenging, to be able to use the right type of glue.
Exactly.
Well, and I'll tell you what, the CA glue, I mentioned before in a podcast that I glued myself together, but I actually was using CA glue for a project one time, and I went to go squeeze it. Of course, naturally the CA glue kind of hardens in the little tip, and I had my little hobby knife trying to get it out, and I actually stuck the hobby knife down in there. You can see where this is going. I stuck the hobby knife down in the spout because I was thinking, oh, it'll just kind of break up that little uh, hardened area in there. But what I didn't realize is that when I put the hobby knife down in there, it punctured the side of the spout. So as I go to start, getting the droplet to come out the top, it's actually spewing out the side of
and I'm going to take it. It wasn't
you know,
thick CA. It was probably nice.
No.
Thin
Yeah.
CA, right?
Well, the thick CA does not harden as quickly. The thin CA, for some reason, just gets caught in there, and I don't know if it's because of the way I'm trying to get just a drop, and I may touch the tip to the hardener or whatever. But because sometimes I'll spray the kicker on one side, and then I'll kind of maybe draw a line that way that it kind of hardens as I'm drawing it. But yeah, anyway, to make a long story short, it went all over my fingers, and I don't know why that when you glue your model, the stuff doesn't seem to dry. You have to spray kicker on it, or it takes it 2 or 3 or 4 minutes to dry. But when it gets to your fingers or your hands or whatever the surface is you're touching, it seems to dry almost instantaneously. And now my fingers, all 5 fingers, well, my thumbs I weren't, but all 4 fingers were glued together. And I literally look like Spider-Man or Aquaman or whatever with the webbed fingers because I can't pull them apart and I can't move them, and I'm holding, with one hand I'm holding the glue, and oh my gosh, it was such a mess. And now anything I touch sticks to my whole hand. So I literally, good thing I wasn't like having a feather pillow fight or something. I'd look like a chicken, but it was difficult, and you start to panic because you're like, oh my gosh, my fingers are glued. And trust me, trying to pull your fingers apart after you glued them together, that ain't happening either because it hurts. It's right. It'll basically rip the skin from one finger to the
it's like
next.
licking a metal,
never done
like
it
licking a
before.
metal pole during an ice storm. Something
Yeah, sticking your tongue to it. Yeah, it's gonna peel the skin. So, luckily for me, only because I've done this once or twice before, they do sell a product. BSI has it. Bob Smith Industries. It's called Debonder. It's your friend.
Yes, it is.
And so basically, I have it sitting on my desk. I immediately go over to my desk and I walk to the bathroom and I put the debonder on my fingers. And it doesn't do it immediately. You have to kind of work it into the the crevices of your fingers, but eventually it will all come off or debond. It won't come off your hand, but it'll debond your fingers to where now your phalanges are actually wiggly and working. But
so what's a guy to do who doesn't have any debonder, Mike? What else can you?
That's a good question. Good luck. Go swimming, I guess, because you got some great strokes.
No,
I don't know. Enter the Olympics because of
yeah, Michael Phelps doesn't have anything on you with you and your wet
No,
hand, right?
that's right. Glue the other one just like it, and then you'll be even better.
Yeah.
I'm a professional swimmer today because I got webbed hands.
So to answer
So,
to back up to answer a couple of your questions that you had, like how come it wasn't bonding the material you were bonding? Once again, because you live in a very arid area, there's no moisture
true.
in the air, and Ca is another glue that has a chemical reaction with the oxygen or the water molecules, and so that's why when it gets to your hand has water in it, and that's why that stuff says, "Oh, look, water. I'll bond everything that has water."
What are you saying? I got sweaty
Could
palms?
be.
I probably do. Working on stuff makes me nervous.
Exactly. So that's why I wasn't bonding to like a piece of wood or the materials that you had, but ran down, touched your fingers, and was having a heyday.
Oh
So
yeah.
jumping in the pool, that's not going to help you. It's just going to make it worse.
No,
So
it will.
pouring hot water on your hand or any of those things, no, no, no. You're just helping the glue bond that much harder. If you happen to spill this upon yourself and you want to try to get rid of it, you can either use nail polish remover, or if you have any acetone, and most guys have acetone or some sort of paint thinner at the house, splash a little bit of that on your hands, and that will help debond you. Uh, but
Yeah, and hopefully you're not allergic to
hopefully
acetone.
not, and you're not near an open flame. So that's the other thing to tell you.
You don't want to be smoking while you
Yeah,
do
if
this.
your
For
wife
all
has
you
a bunch of
people out there.
candles around the house, just
Yes.
go outside and do this. That's the other key. Go outside. Stay away from anything nice that you have in your house. Don't go near it in this particular situation.
So you're saying my wife's kitchen sink is not the place to do this?
No, it is not. And I was not there or witnessed anything happen in your wife's sink. You can't use the
No. Well, I've learned that lesson the hard way. I don't do that anymore. But yeah, I have an actual utility sink in the laundry
It's
room
all the
that I
way around
use.
in the laundry room. Who wants to walk all the way over there?
I know when the kitchen sink is just right here. After I glued the table and the countertop, I can just
It's a
glue
hop and a
the
skipper
sink
away.
too.
I suppose you have to go all the way down there, open up the thing, walk in there.
I don't know what it is about women that think that we can work in these small, confined spaces. I gotta have some room. And that big island that I have in my
It's
kitchen,
convenient.
that's the best place. It is very convenient to lay all my stuff out.
And it has
Why she
plugs,
doesn't understand
put
that?
things in all
And it
around
does. It has
around it.
plugs. It has for my soldering iron and my, hot glue gun
And when you drop
and
things on it, you
whatever
can
else.
see it. You can see where they go, like little screws and
That's
nuts.
true.
It's a perfect
Yeah,
working spot.
it is a
I don't know
perfect
why she
working spot.
gets mad. She yells about going out in the garage. You drop a
Because the garage, your man cave in the garage.
Yeah, because you drop a screw out in your garage, you'll never find it. It's a perfect camouflage the way the floor is and everything. So yeah,
Oh yeah, because I have an epoxy floor out there. Yeah, that's true. But working in the garage on both extremes, for us, it has to be only during a certain time of the year. Because I'm not going out there in the winter in the summertime and bake myself to death. Because it's like working in an oven. It's like 500 degrees in my garage, so I can't really store airplanes out there either. I do, but yeah, the bad news is when I bring them in the wintertime or when I want to go fly them, I have to check every glue joint because you never know if it just cooked off the glue.
oh, that's right.
Got
One
loose.
of the last times I was down there, I grabbed something that was in a box just to check it out, and
Yeah,
just kind of fell apart in my hands.
yeah, yep. That's
No,
that's
it
just
was that
because it gets
GWS, that old GWS F-15 that you had, and we had to take
Oh, the
yeah,
foam.
we had to pull it apart, and I go, and it was
Yeah.
epoxy together, and so I was trying to work to get it apart, and just kind of just pulled right to pieces. I was like, oh, that was way easier than I.
Yeah, that's from being in the Phoenix oven for a couple of years. Throw it out there. So now some of the bigger airplanes, the balsa wood airplanes, they usually don't have too big of a problem. But the foam ones or like you were talking about the welder's glue, and I really like welder's glue. I have several tubes of
Yeah,
it,
it's
you
good
know, and
stuff.
it's one of those things
It's good
that
stuff.
you used to be able to go to the store and order and just buy it off the shelf. But I think you have to order it. I haven't really found it on the shelves too much
Yeah, you
anymore.
used to be able to get it at Home Depot.
Yeah, and I've tried Ace Hardware and a couple other places, but now you actually have to order it, and I ordered it in a 2-pack, and sometimes it comes in a 4, because you get a better shipping deal. So I have like 4 tubes of that stuff, and it's not like you need a whole lot. So I still have a lot of it. I haven't really switched over to the quick grips stuff yet, but one of the things I like to do for my with the welder's glue is that welder's glue has a great reaction to Blenderm tape, and the Blenderm tape, is that medical tape that you use for cuts and stuff, and
How convenient.
you can order that as well. Yeah, I know, right? I keep it around. If I'm not gluing myself, I'm cutting myself, then I have both.
Now
So
you've
I can glue
you've had to
myself
do
and
that
cut.
out at the field, I think, a couple of times.
I did it at the field, and I did it here at the house too. But yeah, totally different story. We had a guy that cut his finger, and he was bleeding everywhere because his prop hit his finger, and he needed to go to urgent care. And he was trying to hold his finger together. And I laughed and I said, "Doesn't anybody here have any Blenderm?" Well, of course I had some. Everybody had some. They all whipped this Blenderm out. Like everybody's like, "Waha, here it is." So I took this Blenderm, wrapped it around his finger, and it kind of stopped the bleeding for a little bit, and he was able to get to the urgent care and get, I think, 6 or 9 stitches or something. So it worked. But back, the Blenderm itself I use for hinges. So like my EPP Park Flyer airplanes, I put the hinges together, and then I'll run a strip of Blenderm across the hinge. So it may, so the airplane actually comes with an EPP hinge, but I'll put the Blenderm across the hinge, and then I'll take this welder's glue and I'll just put it over top of the Blenderm, rub my finger, kind of making it like a paint, like I'm, actually painting the top of the Blenderm, and it'll actually melt the Blenderm into the EPP. And what that does is when I'm doing 3D stuff and I'm real low to the ground and I cartwheel my airplane, or tail touch it and it kind of falls over, it doesn't rip the control surfaces. That acts as a stopgap for tearing the EPP. So, and if you really want a strong one, you put the Gorilla Glue down and then put the Blenderm and then put Gorilla Glue on top of that, and it will triple bond it to the EPP. It works fabulous. I have it almost on my ailerons and the rudders and the elevator. I also do it on my gear. Like if I have EPP gear, you can put it on there if you're like some of the weak points. Any place your airplane's going to tear, and trust me, if you're hard on it as I am, and you're knife edging an inch above the ground and grab a weed or something that's or sprinkler head. That's my typically I'm
Your
grabbing a
nemesis,
sprinkler
yeah.
head. Yes, I've lost more than one airplane to a sprinkler head. But anyway, if you grab it and it pulls on that EPP, it won't tear. So,
Now, one thing,
but that's one of my favorite.
you said one thing that folks need to remember, and we talked about it a little bit in our first podcast, is EPP. It's a wonder foam. It's absolutely wonderful. It's super resilient, and it's great for crashes. You can use any kind of glue with it, but there's one problem with it, and that is nothing likes to stick to it. It's so wonderful that nothing will stick to it. So normally, where you could put tape or just regular packing tape on something, or you could, do some simple repairs and make it stick, it won't stick to that stuff. Certain paints won't stick to it. If you want to paint your model, that doesn't like to stick to it. So you have to prep the surface. And like with most foams or materials, you just lightly sandpaper the stuff, and then it gives a little bit more surface area, and then get the grip to it. But with this stuff, it chemically is inert. Nothing wants to stick to it. It doesn't want to bond with anything. And that's where, in order to get something, like if you wanted to put like a little bit of tape to something or use that Blenderm, which does stick to it a little bit, in order to get it to stick well, you actually have to put something on the EPP. So you can use CA glue. You can put a thin layer of CA glue and and spread it around, and then things will stick to the CA glue. Like Mike was saying, you could use that welder's glue. Welder's glue or contact cement sticks to EPP. The quick grip that I have sticks to it well, but the welder's glue is
foam tack. The foam tack.
Foam tack will stick to it. Even as we've been finding out, what works really well is that Minwax. And the Minwax is it's not really a glue, like you said. It's for putting on floors. What do you want to call that stuff, Mike? When it's
polyacrylic.
Polyacrylic, coating. For like a paint. Yeah. But in essence, for our use, it's like a a primer. It's almost like primer. You could put it. You could put that on top of like you could paint your plane with that, and then you can paint it with any other spray paint you want, and it'll stick. It'll stick to the Minwax, and the Minwax sticks.
Yeah, because foam doesn't react very well to enamel paints. You have to use water based type paints if you're going to paint foam. But if you use the Minwax and you let it dry, it will actually take an enamel paint. It won't eat your foam. And I've seen guys do that. They'll take a rattle can of enamel, whatever that stuff is that you can just buy right off the shelf, and they'll spray right on their foam and just watch it deteriorate right before their eyes. And it's not, you can't stop it because it's a chemical reaction. And exactly. I don't think it's the paint itself. I think it's actually the aerosol that's in there, propellant. But you know, another way to do this, and I know this is probably not in the glue section, but that really thin fiber tape, I think they call it fiber tape. It's what you use for drywall.
Oh yeah, it's
the real thin stuff.
Yeah, I can't. It's mesh
fiber.
Mesh.
Yeah, mesh. That's what it is. Yeah, but it you know, that stuff. It's got, if you buy the ultra thin stuff, and you can put that on a foam, and if you use the Minwax on that, it works very similar to the epoxy. You know, to making it fiberglass. Instead of using actual fiberglass cloth, you can use that. When I built that Batwing, that's what I used on the bottom of the foam. I just put all that Fabri-Tac on there. It sticks. It's got a little tackiness to it. I laid it all out. You can cut it with a pair of scissors. You take Minwax. You put the Minwax over it, and you can take Beacon glue. The Beacon foam tack stuff works fantastic. It works almost as good, or if not better, than the Minwax. But it's kind of expensive. The Minwax is not near as expensive as the Beacon stuff. That's pretty hefty. But you can just put it out there, and it does a great job. Anything, if you're landing, you know, for us out here, we land a lot of dirt, you know, so it scratches up the bottom of the foams, or, you know, whatever the plastics, and you can put that stuff on there, and it definitely gives you a lot better contact when you drag it across the grass, or the not so much grass. we have a little grass out of the park, but
it depends on the time
kind of
year,
thin.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, when it's in the wintertime and they're actually watering it, it's really thick. But during the summertime, it has a tendency to get a little thin, and the rocks kind of eat your foam up. But we don't have such the snow and everything you guys have up there.
Yeah, and grass. You know, during the summer, we have a lot of grass. So
that's true. Well, I think you got AstroTurf up there too, right?
Yes.
Fly on.
Fields I fly, it's definitely one of the best ones. All AstroTurf.
I actually like flying off AstroTurf. It's kind of it doesn't hurt your airplane as much as cement, but at the same time, it gives you the same effect that a cement would, because it's so short. You know, like if you had an airplane with wheels on it, it doesn't get dragged down in the grass. It works very similar to a cement runway.
Well, so I'm sure all the, you know, high schools or middle schools and stuff, their tracks and stuff use all AstroTurf fields where you live, and they do the same thing up here, but for different reasons. You know, for you, it's, you know, of course, you know, the cost of watering the grass, and once again, it gets so hot, you know, during the summer, you have to use it. Where for us, during the time that people want to use the fields, it's just, by the time the grass grows, well, it's the end of the season by the time, you know, fall sports start up. And so, you know,
you get grass for like 2 weeks, and then it's snow on top of the grass.
Literally. So they come through with a snowplow and blow off all the snow so they can play. So,
well, is there any other type of glue that you've run into that you really like using? We've kind of touched on a lot of them.
I would say, like, the Quick Grip, once again, is one of the ones I really like. Once again, I can't say enough about Gorilla Glue. And of course, we didn't talk that there's two types of Gorilla Glues for a lot of the beginners out there. There's a yellow Gorilla Glue, and there's a white Gorilla Glue. They're both good, but you have to know what you want to use it for. Now, the yellow, the big things about the yellow Gorilla Glue are, it foams like nobody's business. If you have wide gaps that you want to fill with that stuff, use the yellow stuff. Do Mike's
Yeah, it's actually brown in the container, but it dries
yep,
yellow,
yes.
but it's brown.
Use Mike's technique with the water, and you will have like a pile of foam. So it's great. It's great for filling. Like once again, if you're building something or you're trying to fill in the gaps for something, yellow stuff works wonderful. Works wonderful. But the downfall of it is it takes almost 24 hours for all of it to dry. So if you're doing a repair, just tape it up, put it in the corner, and come back and check it out the next day. The white Gorilla Glue, this is where it's more superior. It doesn't foam up nearly as much as the brown stuff does. I'd say what about a quarter,
Yeah,
maybe a
probably
half.
so.
If you add a lot of water, but usually
Yeah.
about a quarter of the other stuff expands. But it's pretty much done after what, a half an hour. It
Yeah, you actually it depends on how much water you add to, but you can get it done. I've seen it cure much faster, but I'm at a little bit hotter temperatures. But yeah.
right. But within a half an hour, you can go back to flying with this stuff.
Oh, easy. Yeah,
Sure.
easy.
Now the nice part is it dries white. So most foam planes are white, so it works out perfectly.
It's hard to sand though.
It can be a little hard. You have to be careful because it seems that the glue is a little tougher than the foam is. So if you're being overzealous, you'll have a raised portion of the glue and you'll have very little foam. You have to be a
Right.
little careful with that.
Yeah.
But I would have to say those. I would have to say those two. I can't really think of another new glue that I've used that I like a lot. Like I said, the big thing with glues. Once again, I know you hate me saying this, is that experiment with stuff. Find some stuff and experiment with it. I've heard of guys using like liquid nails, like we were just talking about how it comes in that
Right.
these
The tube.
big long tubes. I've heard of guys doing construction with that. I haven't, but I've heard of people doing that. Like I said, even though we're not big hot glue users, I know it's really big, and I know that once again, not all the sticks are the same. So different sticks have
Yeah, there's actually you got to make sure you look at it because one stick is for like a super hot. It's got a high melting point, and the other one has a low melting point.
right.
And living here, the low melting point is usually the stuff that can bite you in the butt. Yeah, not like I haven't learned the hard way, I guess.
Um,
Actually, the yellow gorilla or the brown gorilla glue works really really well. I had a balsa wood airplane that had some really weak gear on it. The gear just kind of pushed inside it, and it had like two screws, and it just was it just the weight of the airplane with it sitting on the gear. You could see the gear was not really put together as good as it could have been. I think they've since changed the design on it, but I actually could see where it was stressing out some of the wood underneath. I think your Beaver that you have had a similar problem where the gear was just far enough apart that it put stress on the corners. And
oh
so what
yeah,
I did is
yeah.
I took that glue and I leveled the whole model, and then I just took that glue and just put it in the little tray where the gear was, and I let it sit for 24 hours, and it made like a brick inside there, but it didn't add any weight to the airplane, so it foamed up, gave it a lot of strength. It kind of covered all of the balsa wood, and it foams together and makes kind of like a
Yeah,
little
and
brick
that's another
around
big thing to
everything.
remember, folks. As opposed to epoxy, when you mix a half ounce of epoxy together, at the end, after it gets done curing, you have a half an ounce of epoxy.
Or less. Because it does, it's not, it's going to be exactly half or a little less when it dries because it's got some moisture in it too. But
It has a little bit, but nothing like
yeah,
the Gorilla Glues or like the Minwax. The great part about Minwax is, even though it's not a glue, but when you use it, you can paint it on as thick as you want, and most of it evaporates because it's water.
right.
So you're not really adding that much weight when you look at it. But Gorilla Glue, don't really use that much for like the quick grip or for the welders, so you're just using a little bit. So, but if you're using a lot of the Gorilla Glue, you don't have to worry about it because it's not like it's going to add tons and tons of weight because all the water evaporates out of it.
That's true. But it does expand, so be careful. I would experiment by just, just put a little bit on there and let it
Oh
sit
gosh.
and see, because you can go overboard on that stuff. It's not like Elmer's glue where you put it on there and it just kind of stays.
Right. Now
This stuff,
remember my
I've
friend
I've
I was
had
just
it. I've
telling you
had it
about you.
coming out of every.
More is more. He has the same thing with the Gorilla Glue. I told him, hey, just put a drop, put a drop or two in here and da 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 da, and he'd put a drop or two, and he goes, yeah, I put a drop or two into the hole. And I just said, well, that doesn't even fill up the hole. And so I filled up the hole and I put tape on it, like you said. And then the next day, I had this. He showed me a picture of like this glue monster that just oozed out and just oozed across this counter, down onto the floor, on up the wall. It was just hilarious. And
So I'm not the other one that's gluing
no,
furniture
no,
together
my
with it.
buddy, more is more, and I keep telling him, do what you think is that won't work, and then stop.
So that's a good question too. And I know I just was interested in what your thoughts were, but let's say that you did put a lot of glue there, and the glue does kind of run into it's like liquid. It takes the least path resistance. So
Yes.
in a EPP style foam airplane, it will penetrate all the open cell part of the EPP, and it'll start creating these little stalactites or stalagmites or whatever. And so you'll get these little, tall, bubbly looking things that are now hard as concrete. So we talked about the sanding portion of it. The Gorilla Glue doesn't sand very well. So how do you get those? What do you do to kind of level those out?
Okay,
How do you
so let's
deal
say
with
we
those?
have like a couple of stalactites or stalagmites that are hanging there, and the first thing I would say is grab your clippers or a pair of scissors or some type of shearing type tool, and shear off as much as you can, right? As close to the body as you can. And then the next thing I would say to do is you get a razor blade, a brand new sharp, super sharp razor blade, and you shave it off. Like I said, you could sand it, but sanding sometimes doesn't work that well, depending on the hardness of the foam, all that kind of stuff. So I would just say take a razor, X-Acto knife, and just shave. Sit there and just take your time and just shave it down until it's as level as you can get it. And then
So you're suggesting that I don't use my radial arm saw to take those off, or
I would say no, but somebody out there's going to do it. So hey,
you said to experiment,
yeah,
by the
I
way.
I
So I
did. Go ahead, knock yourself out.
figured.
Send me some
When I
pictures.
wonder why my
I know the
airplane is
viewers
cut
would
in
like to
half.
see some pictures. We could probably find a board. We could put that up so people can see.
I'm sure.
But
Yeah, I'll get out my radial arm saw and cut off these little stalagmites.
but yeah, that's where you have to get down and you have to actually just shave that stuff off, since it doesn't sand as nicely as other things or like epoxy.
Yeah, I actually have a pair of their snippers for like a electrician snippers
Right, yeah.
for yeah. So they're really short, but they have like a little scoop to them, and you can just kind of stick it in there. And then they're pretty easy. I found a pair for a couple bucks, and you're not gonna. They're pretty sharp until you cut a bunch of those off, and then they're not going to be sharp anymore. So I don't spend hundred. I don't go out into my toolbox and grab the Snap-on style. I just buy something, Harbor Freight or whatever, and then they clip off really well, and you can kind of dig down in there and snip them, and then you can also put painter's tape over the top of it. Sometimes that'll help. They won't grow so tall; they'll grow flat. But it just depends on how much tape. I mean, how much glue you use. If you use too much glue, it'll just raise the painter's tape, because the painter's tape doesn't really
Right.
stick to the foam either,
Or the glue won't dry.
or it won't
It'll
dry.
form a
Yeah,
perfect seal, and no air can
yeah.
get to it, and you have to let it sit there for maybe 2 days. It dries. Honestly,
Well, sometimes that's easy for me. I'm gone for 2 days.
that's true. Or
So
people, they'll go, oh, it's all done, and they'll peel the tape off, and then they'll come back the next morning, and then they have the stalactites running down their plane, not realizing that the glue that's underneath, it's like a scab. The glue that's underneath it
right,
starts
right.
expanding because now it's exposed to air and starts expanding, and it starts coming out of all sorts of weird places. So,
Yeah, I normally just kind of keep an eye on this stuff. If I'm doing the Gorilla Glue, I'll put it in there. Maybe not put the tape on it right away, but let it start expanding, And then once it starts getting a little bit above
Yeah, then put
the
the tape.
surface,
Right.
I'll just take my finger and
Oh, you can
kind of put a little
do that.
wet my finger, and then just run my finger down there, and
Do that as well.
and it'll level it all out. Then I'll put the tape on it, and it should do all right. But now I have Gorilla Glue on my fingers, so I will tell you that the Gorilla Glue, washing it off with water is not advisable because
Yeah. Yeah.
now my fingers are like they're so sticky. It's like you're back to your honey bun statement. I mean, it's like I stuck my hand in a bunch of honey and it sticks to everything. And so, if you do that, I will tell you that the best way to get that off is just to use rubbing alcohol.
Rubbing alcohol is your friend.
Yeah, I have a set underneath the sink where I do all my work, and it pretty much it'll come out, and I put it on a shop rag and wipe my hands off, and most of it'll come off. And that'll work as well on your model too. But you don't want to spill the rubbing alcohol in the part where you're gluing, because that doesn't work either.
Exactly. Now, also, folks,
Defeats the purpose.
there's two different types of rubbing alcohol when you go to the store. The normal stuff is normally like 70-30. I think it's 70-30, and I think I can't remember if it's 70-30 is talking about the alcohol to water ratio. I think that's what that means.
Yeah.
And that stuff works okay. The stuff that you want is the 90% alcohol. So you may have to move a couple of bottles around, but you'll see it in there, and it'll say it's a 90% alcohol, and that's what you want. That stuff works awesome.
Except when you pour it on your hands and wipe your eyeballs. Don't do that, because that's pretty.
Yeah, make sure
too.
that you don't have any cuts, because you will know about it.
Oh yes,
instantly.
Yeah. So working with that hobby knife, and you pricked your finger once or twice, or sliced your finger. Yeah, you put that alcohol after you're working with the Gorilla Glue, you'll know about it. So will your neighbors.
Exactly. But you don't have to worry about infection. You don't have to worry about that. That's the good part about it.
No, that's true.
I haven't read many.
And if I did cut myself, I got my Blenderm to help me, and my CA glue.
CA glue. Right? Like I said, I haven't heard much of people getting poisoned or dying from infections from those type of things just because of what we use. So that's the nice part.
Well, at least we haven't heard about it. You can email us at theparkflyer@gmail.com and tell us all about your cousin that died from some infection.
Your Uncle Lou.
Yeah, my Uncle Lou died from Gorilla Glue poisoning. Well, I didn't know he drank this stuff. That'd be pretty sick, though. Can you imagine if somebody drank Gorilla Glue? That'd be the.
He couldn't drink too much; he'd get full.
Well, yeah, I know, right? Your dentist wouldn't like it either, though, because you glue all your teeth shut. Maybe a good diet plan, though.
Would be.
Never know.
Yeah. You wouldn't have to pay for that expensive surgery to get your stomach cut in pieces. Just
who cares about the lap band? Just take some Gorilla Glue, sir.
Right.
It'll be fine.
It'll foam up in your stomach, make you can only digest this much. Gorilla Glue.
We interrupt this program for a special service announcement. Despite what these two idiots are suggesting, the Park Flyer podcast staff does not endorse the drinking of any Gorilla Glue for a diet plan or any other reason. We now return to our regularly scheduled broadcast, already in progress.
We are so wrong. It's just terrible. Well, we've talked about Gorilla Glue and Quick Grip and CA Glue. I think we've covered pretty much all the glues. Welder's Glue. The one thing we didn't talk about was JB Weld. It doesn't really work on foam. I guess is the best way to say it. JB Weld is more for your metal landing gears and maybe some motor mounts.
Right, yeah. No, absolutely. I would say for, once again, talking about, as my daughter likes to say, the sad times, meaning any time before, like 10 years ago, the sad times. Well, Dad, during the sad times, I'm sure they had to do that. She said.
Is she saying you're old? Is that what she's saying?
I think that's what she's saying. So back,
just saying it in a nice way.
In a nice way, yeah. So basically, when models were more, like you said, stick, wood, and metal was the main construction materials. JB Weld worked really well for that stuff. But nowadays, with, like I said, mostly foams, there's really not a place for it as much. Now you can still use it. I have very little experience using it. I'm able to make do with all the other things that we talked about, But I know for some of the older guys, like in my club, they talk about using it all the time.
Yeah, I don't even know if you can find some of that anymore.
I think yeah,
Ace Hardware may
I think
carry,
you
but
can.
I know some of the box stores, the home box stores, don't carry it very
So, folks, if you have any glues that you like to use, then please write to us and let us know. We're definitely we'll come on air and we'll talk about any hints or tricks that you know or things that you products that you find that you like to use. Then please write into us and let us know, and we'll put your name out in the air and let everybody know of the great things that you find out. One of the great things about this hobby is there's no right answer, and everybody can contribute. So please find something that you found that works. Let us know.
much. Yeah, I can increase the box that I have full of foam glued parts that don't really fit anything. I give it a try. I'm always willing to glue two things together, as long as it doesn't glue me to together as well. Well, Jay, I appreciate you participating again tonight. We thank you guys for listening to the Park Flyer podcast. Hope you had some good instruction on the type of glues that are out there. And once again, if you have any questions, give us a holler at the parkflyer@gmail.com. Help us out. So we appreciate it, and hope you guys have a good night. We'll see you on the next episode of the Park Flyer podcast. Signing off, I'm Michael.
I'm Jay.
We'll see you next week.
You have been listening to the Park Flyer podcast. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to your next visit. Please feel free to email your questions, topics, or suggestions to parkflyerpodcast@gmail.com. This program is brought to you in part by Knife Edge Software, makers of Real Flight, Spectrum Radios, Amazon, Hobby King, Value Hobby, Lemon Receivers, and anyone else that will take these morons, Visa, MasterCard, or PayPal.